a minimum shutter speed is at, oh my god, his arm. I've got this new mic arm. Literally, God, this day just keeps getting better. Hey, g'day, and welcome back to my channel. My name is tutorials. Today's a bad day. I'm having one of those days where just everything seems to be going wrong. I'd figured out my filming setup just then, and then I spilled half a cup of coffee all over my desk. So, happy days. Anyways, this is a big week. I'm pretty busy. I'm going on another little trip on Saturday and I'm trying to prep a lot of content for that. So last week on my Instagram, I asked you guys to send me questions for a Q&A video because Q&A videos are easy to make. And that's pretty much it. So you get a video where you ask me questions and I provide you with answers. Let's begin. First question from Abdul Rahim. Hello, what is the best way to shoot a Holy Grail time-lapse using a mobile phone? Tricky question. So Samsung's latest software in the camera app actually has a really cool Hyperlapse night mode built in, which does a near flawless day to night Holy Grail time lapse. The issue is it's low bitrate and also it's limited to full HD resolution, which isn't ideal. Besides that, you could shoot in pro mode in some apps and then just use LR timelapse to deflicker and grade those raw files into smoothness, or you can just blend multiple videos into one. I'll make a separate video about this because it's something that I want to experiment with and I want to share my findings with you all. Alright, next question. 111 Street. Do mirrorless cameras have any type of advantage over a regular DSLR for time-lapse? There's no mirror flying around every time you take a photo. I just made a video about, should you worry about your shutter count with shooting time-lapses. There's still a curtain going up and down, so there's still potentially mechanical failures. Besides that, you just get more dust on your sensor with mirrorless cameras. So then there's the size and weight benefits of mirrorless, but then they're usually negated by the size and the weight of the lenses that you slap on. So I don't know. Love to get your opinion. I've got, the Lumix S1 mirrorless, and I still have a bunch of DSLRs that I use, and it's up in the air. I still love using the DSLRs, but I also really don't mind using the Lumix. So what type of light metering should I use if I do the Aperture Priority method? Good question. I very rarely use Aperture Priority method, but I generally have center weighted average metering on, which kind of averages out, but has more of a bias towards the center of the frame, which has, kind of worked well for me. Here's a shot that was shot in AV mode on a Canon and then deflickered using LR time-lapse, and, that worked out quite well, I'd say. Zach Ford, what is the most efficient way to sell my time-lapses? Straight up, I'm the wrong person to ask. Emmerich's got much better experience with selling time-lapse footage. All I know and all I've heard from pretty much everyone in the world when it comes to selling time-lapse footage is that it hasn't been easy the last couple of years, and rates and numbers and money has gone down. I don't really bother with selling stuff unless it's a direct request, then I will move on that. I've had some, big requests from Canon or Samsung or Google. Then it's worth it taking the time to do a one-on-one negotiation. But I can't be bothered putting up stock footage and adding metadata and uploading and making sure everything's a clean and flawless file, because a lot of my files have little errors in there, and then if I have to remove every bird out of a shot before I upload it to then potentially make $2 on a sale, I don't know if that's worth my time. I'd rather spend that time doing other stuff. Pretty much. So yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have the right type of experience to answer your question. Slugger Media, have you ever experimented with interval ramping? I believe I have once ages ago when I did a day to night, a full day to sunset to night to Milky Way in the Northern Territory in Australia years and years ago, where of course the starting interval was different than the ending interval. I did that with a Ramper Pro device, which is an external bulb ramping controller for your camera. But I haven't used that since, and I barely remember how I set that up. It's not something I take into consideration when I'm shooting day-to-night time-lapses. Anders Larsson, how do you find good compositions when shooting time-lapses? What constitutes as a good composition? Is following the rule of thirds a good composition, or the golden ratio spiral, or it's kind of subjective, I think. It's photography, it's art, it's subjective. I don't know, what's a good composition? Something that's well balanced for me. You can have a straight on shot that's very basic and straightforward, boom, subject right in the middle, or put it on that intersection with one of those third lines. It all works. I don't know, it's subjective. I just go by what I think feels good. I try to keep in mind that the majority of my viewers will watch my content on a 16:9 aspect ratio, which is what you're watching right now. So trying to find a composition that works for that. But then I also want them to work for maybe the other aspect ratios like 2:3 or 4:3. Honestly, it really depends, but in general, I consider more of what is moving in the subject, and I consider what the viewer will be looking at, and I prioritize that. So if you're having trouble setting up a composition, maybe think of what the viewer will most likely be focused on in the shot and prioritize that in your composition, then finding something that's super well balanced overall. Does that make sense? I don't know. Anyways, moving on. Scott Stramick, hey Scott, do you still need to lock your aperture in, or is software enough to remove the flicker? Software is definitely enough to remove the flicker, but it's always better to get stuff right in camera, so I still often lock my aperture. Obviously on the S1 that's not an option unless you use that adapter, but on the Canons I still lock my aperture all the time. That being said, if you do have flickering, LR Timelapse or Digital Anarchy's flicker-free plugin for After Effects will solve that for you with no issues whatsoever. 4_photographer. I'm sorry about the, as you can see on screen, the usernames get cut off thanks to Instagram. Hello, how are you? Thanks for asking. I've been better today, but yesterday I was great, and I'm sure tomorrow I'm going to be better than today, so that's that. Thanks for asking. I hope you are well as well. Shots from the working out shutter angle / frame rate for smoother time lapses. The 180-degree rule, as is, has been used in cinematography for probably over a century now, I want to say. Half your interval should be your shutter speed. So if you have a 2-second interval, you ideally have a 1-second exposure. So you slap an ND filter on there if you're doing stuff in the middle of the day when it's super, super bright. That's what I talked about in my filter video that you can watch up here. Then again, if you are shooting a sunset, it's hard to put filters on there because then at nighttime your exposure has to be super, super long, or you have to remove the filter, and then because you remove a filter, you'll get a different color cast, which can be hard to remove. So if I'm doing a sunset, I will most likely not have a filter on there because I know if I have to extend the shutter later on, that it's just not going to be easy. So that means that when that sequence starts, I'm not actually doing that half interval shutter speed timing thing. And then, I think like no one's ever complained on any of my videos, be it on YouTube or from a client, that my shutter speed didn't look right. So, you can be as nitpicky as you want. You can go into as much detail as you want when shooting stuff. In the end, if you make it look good and it works in a overall edit, then, that's all that matters, really. Kuro_smile. How to edit the transition from day to night without the vid looking weird. Just watch this video here. That's it. You use LR Timelapse to ramp your settings over a large sequence of photos, and you edit them in between, and LR Timelapse does pretty much everything for you. Cannot stress enough how good LR Timelapse is. If you want to buy that software, go via my link, because then I get a small percentage, and that's part of how I fund this channel and make all these free videos for you guys. Akil, baseline camera model for time-lapse shooting. Well, honestly, depends on what you need. You could make professional stuff on this phone even, but ideally you have something that's at least 20 megapixels, I'd say, and has full manual settings. So it doesn't matter if it's mirrorless or a DSLR or whatever, as long as you can have raw photos and full manual settings with ideally a lens that you can change as well. So yeah, I'd say that's the bare minimum. Adults in Disney, have you ever shot a Holy Grail hyperlapse? If so, how long did it take? I have never done that, and I am planning on doing that soon. I've got a very cool shot planned here in London. Someone that's been doing really cool ones that I've seen on Instagram is Harry Berlin, so make sure to go check him out. He's been doing some really cool work over in Berlin. Earth.paleblue. Aperture priority versus manual. Which one to choose and when? Aperture priority only if you're sure that there's nothing going to be in the frame that's going to throw off your exposure throughout the sunset, and if you can't be by your camera yourself. I still prefer the manual method myself because I know what I'm doing and I'm in control. The camera most often doesn't know that it's shooting a time lapse unless you have specific time lapse modes built in. But yeah, aperture priority mode has the risk that it ups or lowers the exposure to a point where you can't fix it in post. Whereas if you can do it yourself in the manual mode, then you know what's up and you know how you're going to edit everything yourself. So yeah, but yeah, sometimes you can't be with your camera and you just got to run it in aperture priority mode, which is fair enough, but you still have that small risk that it goes wrong and then you've ruined the sequence, but there's worse things in life. Jaswant, have you tried DaVinci Resolve for Hyperlapse and Timelapse? I started working on a series of videos for this channel about DaVinci Resolve because it is incredibly powerful and free software, or at least part of it is free. but I just haven't gotten around to it. I know it's very useful, and I know it renders raw files and everything, so expect that later this year I'll be doing a series about DaVinci Resolve. But yeah, for now I hear it's great, and it also has a great stabilizer built in apparently, so very impressive. Can't wait to start working on that series. Alex Spath, or Spath, I don't know how you say that, sorry. Data management workflow from once you get home to after you've posted/finished the time-lapse. Good question, and I will be making a new video about data management and workflow soon. For now, if you want to see my workflow, check out this very long video that I posted here. But if you don't have time to watch that 2.5 hour long banger, offload your memory cards onto a hard drive, import those files into Lightroom using the add method, organize and color grade your photos, all your raw files in Lightroom, save your metadata, import that in After Effects, export high resolution video files from that, use them however you want, post on social media, etc. And then obviously always back up your stuff. If you have data on one hard drive, consider it lost, so 2 hard drives. Depends on what you use. There's a couple of apps that you can use to just mirror data on separate hard drives, or you can work with a RAID system. I've got a NAS in Sydney on which I've got my footage quite securely stored, but then I also have offsite backups of the key sequences or the key data on that NAS system as well. So ideally you have 3 copies of your data, but that's just getting a bit expensive and probably ridiculous for a lot of people. But yeah, if I can just give you one piece of advice, is to at least have 2 copies of all your data, and ideally 1 copy offsite from where you keep the main data. Mullins, any info? Sunsets to star time-lapse. Yeah, you're gonna have to use long intervals or fast glass to make sure that you don't need an exposure as long. But yeah, you're probably looking at a 15-second interval with a fast lens, so you can get away with like a 10-second exposure of your Milky Way or your Astro. Later on, you're going to start ramping, depends on how you want to go, your shutter speed first and then your ISO to keep your noise as low as long as possible. But then besides that, it's the same as any other Holy Grail shoot where you just manually adjust your settings, or you can use a tablet or a phone that's running QDSLR dashboard to control your camera for you, or you can use a bulb ramping device like the Timelapse Plus View or the Ramper Pro, and they're devices that are built specifically for these kinds of shoots where you don't want to man the camera for a very long time. LM Ocean Photo, you talked about shutter count. What about aperture counts? Surely that's a thing. Very good question. I've noticed on my 70-200 f2.8 Mark II, I believe it is, IS, USM, blah, 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 the nice fancy Canon lens, that at the start when that lens was brand new, that the aperture opening and closing was extremely, extremely accurate. And then years later, it's no longer as accurate. And that's when you get aperture flickering, which is why you use the lens lock method that I mentioned earlier. This type of flickering is easily solved with a plugin or a software like LR Timelapse, but yeah, you are right. Aperture flicker, due to wear and tear, where the aperture doesn't close as accurately anymore over time, is a thing. And yeah, it's a thing that you can solve quite easily in post. Good tips to start with the GoPro 7 Black. Well, there's so much stuff you can do with that, and the built-in stabilization for hyperlapses specifically is awesome. Definitely recommend shooting in RAW because the dynamic range you get in RAW is amazing compared to the JPEGs, and the file size isn't even that much bigger. I think this is on the Hero 8 Black, RAW files like 2.8 megabytes and a JPEG's 2.5 megabytes, so might as well shoot RAW because you get much more latitude in your dynamic range for color grading, you know, your white balance, etc. after the fact. So yeah, shoot RAW and play around with the built-in stabilizer for hyperlapses are 2 good starting points for your GoPro 7 Black. Let's go. Next question. How to shoot and process long-term time lapses like construction, season, city, over a year, etc. Abhishek, great question. I don't know. I don't have much experience with long-term time lapses. I do know some people that have great resources for that. Photo Sentinel, an Australian company, and they make gear for long-term time lapses. They've got a newsletter about long-term time lapses and a PDF, a free guide that you can download, which gives you all the info you need to get started with that long-term stuff. Apsy Timelapse Pro lens still have a flare from the car light, or you need to remove it with After Effects? Yes, most lenses still have flaring if you drive a car in front of it or if you shine a light into it. You can remove that, but in my opinion, it's part of a scene, so just keep it in. Like if you're shooting a street with lots of flares and lots of lights, what's the point of removing those flares? That's what it was like. That's kind of what it looks like to the human eye as well. If you've got a car shining in you, just go with it. Just use it. Obviously, if you're shooting a Milky Way shot in a landscape and there's a car driving through and ruining your shot, you should have found a better spot to shoot from to make sure that you didn't get any car flares in your shot. They're quite hard to remove. Yeah, better to just get it right in camera and choose a better location to shoot your Milky Way from. Pete Jobson, is electronic shutter the best option for time-lapse? Depends on what you're trying to achieve. So if you want complete silence, then electronic shutter can be great, but electronic shutter can have several artifacts with it. I've noticed on my Canon, and I can't replicate this, sometimes just using the electronic shutter in time-lapse video mode kind of squeezes the frame together, and I can't explain it. I'm thinking maybe it's when it was windy and the camera's shaking and it's how the sensor reads out the data, or I don't know. It also affects your minimum or maximum shutter speeds. I can never wrap my head around minimum or maximum shutter speed. Like, a minimum shutter speed is that... Oh my god, this arm. I've got this new mic arm. Literally just fell down. God, this day just keeps getting better. Ugh. Let's drop that. Anyways, it's a free blooper for y'all. Yeah, minimum or maximum shutter speed. I can't wrap my... Is a minimum shutter speed 1/8000, or is that 30 seconds? Or is that a maximum shutter speed? I don't know. What's your opinion? Drop it in the comments down below. But yeah, using a curtain shutter usually, I think, has faster... Or look, I don't really know the answer to this question, but it's a good question. So if someone can chime in the comments, that would be great. Thanks, Pete. Can you send some clouds this way, please? Well, London has plenty of clouds today. Alas, I don't have time to go shoot them. I'm here making this video, and I'm about to post that 2.5 hour long video of me editing time-lapse footage. And on that note, go check out that video. You're watching this because you want to learn about time-lapse? Watch this video that is literally 2.5 hours straight of me editing in Lightroom and After Effects. You'll probably learn quite a bit about my process. And if not, you know, maybe it's a good time. It's just me talking gibberish for 2.5 hours while editing during a heat wave in London. It was so hot. And I'm also getting hot right now. But yeah, this is about it. Hope you enjoyed this random Q&A video. We'll do another one very soon, I'm sure. Thanks for tuning in. Any other questions, drop in the comments down below and I might use them in the future video. My ebooks are discounted. Check them out via my store below. And that's pretty much it. Thank you for subscribing, and hopefully I'll see you on the next video. Goodbye.